I would not make any changes to the Jones Act whatsoever. It's a foundation. It works. Things are moving. Prices are fair. Workers are paid fairly. So there's no real change to the Jones Act that I think would be appropriate beyond just let's see where we can help with these other areas that build upon that good foundation.
So occasionally someone will say to me, what would America be like without the Jones Act? And my answer is borderless. And, you don't have to assess the probability of some of these scenarios that we were just talking about to say being borderless is bad. Nobody wants that.
Hello, everyone. This is Admiral Jamie Foggo from the Center for Maritime Strategy at the Navy League of the United States, just outside Washington, D.C. You're listening to the first episode of the 5th season. How about that? 5th season of Maritime Nation, the Center for Maritime Strategy's flagship podcast designed to dive deeply into the policy challenges facing America's sea services and the role of the United States as a sea power on the global stage. Thank you very much to Jonathan Engineered Solutions for sponsoring Season 5 of Maritime Nation. We are honored today to be joined by Jennifer Carpenter and Sara Fuentes. Jennifer Carpenter serves as the President and CEO of the American Waterways Operators, AWO, the national trade association representing the inland and coastal tugboat, towboat, and barge industry, and as President of the American Maritime Partnership. The AMP is the largest, deepest coalition of supporters for the men and women of American maritime. Ms. Carpenter joined AWO in August 1990 and worked her way up the hawsepipe to serve as president and CEO in 2020. Sara Fuentes is the vice president for government affairs at the Transportation Institute. She oversees efforts to educate stakeholders on the importance of a strong U.S.-flagged maritime industry. As part of this work, she serves as vice president of the American Maritime Partnership, on the board of the Propeller Club, Port of Washington, D.C., and chairs the Regulatory Affairs Committee of the USA Maritime Coalition. Ms. Fuentes previously served as vice president of Government and External Affairs with the Navy League of the United States right here in this building. She remains heavily involved in the Navy League, and we appreciate her continued support of this organization. Welcome to Maritime Nation, ladies. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Let me throw out the first question to both of you. The title of our podcast today is The Battle for American Waterways. So we're going to talk about things like the Jones Act. And we have a very diverse set of listeners and viewers because this goes out on YouTube. And I get feedback every month from people who listen to the podcast. So we have to assume that there's folks out there that know the Jones Act back and forth, some who are pro-Jones Act, some who may be con-Jones Act. And we also have folks, particularly in all of our councils all over the United States, who may not know much about it. So if you would, could we please kind of make a basic introduction, a tutorial on what is the Jones Act and what does it mean for this nation? Jennifer, you want to take that one? And then I'll shift over to Sara.
Absolutely. So big picture, the Jones Act is really one of America's oldest homeland security laws. When we talk about the Jones Act, we are technically referring to Section 27 of the Merchant Marine Act of 1920. And that law, which Congress deemed necessary for the national defense and the foreign and domestic commerce of the United States, ensures that we've got the ability to move maritime commerce between 2 points in the U.S., whether those are on the inland waterways, whether those are along our coasts, whether those are non-contiguous trades. They basically say vessels moving domestic commerce have to be owned, have to be built, and have to be flagged U.S. The requirement to flag U.S. carries with it a requirement to be crewed by Americans. And I'll just add one more thing before I turn it over to Sara, and that is the Jones Act is not unique. Very similar laws govern other modes of transportation, and many, many countries around the world, 105 covering 85% of the world's coastlines, as per a new study, have similar laws. So this is our version, but there's lots of others out there.
Jennifer, before we go to Sarah, so you sparked a couple of questions in my mind and probably in our viewers' minds too. So you're talking about commercial shipping traffic under a U.S. flag, U.S. crude, in the continental United States, and you also talked about outside. Does that mean Puerto Rico? Does that mean Hawaii? Does that mean Guam as well?
Yeah, great. Okay, great question. So, U.S. territories and states that are considered domestic destinations, so Hawaii and Alaska as states, Puerto Rico as a domestic territory, are subject to the Jones Act. What does that mean? That means that commerce moving between the mainland U.S. and those places has to be moved on an American-owned, built, and crewed vessel. What it does not mean, and sometimes folks get confused about this, it does not mean that a foreign vessel can't come from any foreign port of call and trade to there. It can. So in Puerto Rico, for example, about 2/3 of the ships that serve Puerto Rico are coming from foreign ports. They are foreign vessels.
Just not carrying American.
They're not carrying
from a U.S.
That's
port.
right. If you want to move from Jacksonville, Florida, you're going to be an American vessel.
Okay. Yes, I do hear a lot of confusion on the net about that. And part of the problem is, the Jones Act, if you go into the literature and you go to, Chat GPT online and you want to look at the Jones Act, it's a lot of legislation from 1920 kind of written in a different language in a different era, sponsored by Senator Wesley Jones, who that's why it's called the Jones Act. Thanks for that clarification. Now, Sara, over to you. From a government affairs and policy design perspective, how should the Jones Act be understood as part of the broader U.S. transportation and national security architecture, rather than as a standalone maritime law? Now, Jennifer alluded to the fact that, hey, this is part of our national security. And that's the way I think of the Jones Act, and that's why I support the Jones Act. But can you kind of clarify that for our listeners?
Sure, happy to. And the Navy League and a podcast called Maritime Nation is the perfect place to do that. The Navy
Thank
League.
you.
Well, I feel like the Navy League has really set the framework for people thinking about the United States as a maritime nation and realizing that our strength comes from, whether it's our national security or our global or our prosperity, come from access to the seas. And so that's why the Navy League advocates not just for the Navy, but for all four sea services: Navy, Marine Corps, Coast Guard, and U.S. Flag Merchant Marine. And so the Jones Act, does not just benefit the Merchant Marine, it benefits all the sea services. So in the same way that the Navy League, opines that all these services are interconnected, the Jones Act really does bring all those pieces together, whether it's national security, homeland security, or economic security. The homeland security piece is very easy and obvious, right? It really, we have thousands of mariners that come into our country every day. And the Jones Act really ensures that the Coast Guard, CBP, these other federal agencies are not overburdened trying to analyze every single vessel and who's on that ship and where are they going. They have a trusted network of American mariners in our inland waterways that act as maritime border security. And not only that, but our mariners are also kind of the eyes and ears. It's another safety check.
Absolutely.
If they see something, they say something. Right.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, our mariners have a good relationship with the Coast Guard. So that's our homeland security. Then secondly, there's a national security piece. Shipbuilding, very popular today, but as you well know, Admiral, not all the time.
Right.
Navy shipbuilding can be very boom or bust.
Right.
And what that Jones Act requirement, that commercial industrial base, the shipbuilding base is always there. So even in peacetime, even when shipbuilding goes out of vogue, you have some shipyards that are operating, shipbuilding knowledge, naval architects that are working and preserving that strategic asset and strategic industry. And not only that, you also have the people, right? The men and women on Jones Act vessels are the same mariners that crew the Navy's military sealift command vessels. And so having them work during peacetime on Jones Act vessels ensures that we have the people there ready to crew these sealift vessels that are trained, ready to go. We know where to find them. So that's the national security piece. And then you also have this economic security benefit. not just the 650,000 jobs that Jennifer and I talk about all the time, but also that kind of economic resiliency. These non-contiguous states that we talked about, Alaska, Hawaii, Puerto Rico, have assured access to shipping thanks to the Jones Act and are not totally dependent on foreign carriers. So it's really this kind of complex set of benefits that affects economic security, homeland security, and national security from the Jones Act, from that very strong foundation from which all these other maritime laws and strengths come from.
Well, thank you very much, Sarah. I love having both of you on the show to help us understand the Jones Act. And you're both subject matter experts in it. Sara is at the Transportation Institute, as I said. And if you're interested in any reading, TI did a pretty nice paper. It's interactive, too. So you can actually go into the paper. It's called Jones Act, Critical to Economic and National Security. And if you want to see what impact the Jones Act has on any state of the union or our states non-contiguous like Alaska or Hawaii, you can just punch on the blue screen and it'll come up with some tidbits and facts for you if you're doing any research or you just want to know. So highly recommend that paper. And, you know, you mentioned that we keep a baseline. Thank God we keep a baseline of merchant ships that can support, you know, both inland and other necessary traffic and carrying supplies and goods and services under American flag. Other nations in the world provide heavy subsidies to the shipbuilding industry. And I'm talking China, you know, who have greater than 50% of commercial assets under a Chinese flag on the high seas. We stopped that support under the Reagan era. You know, if not for the Jones Act, we would be in the hurt locker right now. So that's another reason why I certainly support it. Just briefly, I mean, there is a lot of discussion about the Jones Act out there. And Sara, you've even been on a radio show. I've heard a debate. We won't say who was on the other side, but I thought you did a great job.
Thank you, sir.
What is the other side's beef with the Jones Act? Is it just a misunderstanding? Is it they think it's an unfair trade practice of some sort? What do you think? What's the drive to have this discussion sometimes become very animated on the Hill or in the think tanks?
You know, I think most of that is driven by the think tanks, actually, who constantly have to have kind of new ideas, new suggestions. On the Hill, the Jones Act is very popular. We have good support from...
Why is that?
Well, because it benefits, I mean, it's a very common sense law that benefits Americans and really puts American workers first. You know, it's very, especially from members that have those waterways.
America first is a very popular saying nowadays. Yeah.
It has those, you know, it really ensures that Americans are able to serve other Americans in this nation. So it's popular, common sense, bipartisan support. Our co-chairs on the Coast Guard and Maritime Transportation Subcommittee, Salud Carbajal from California and Mike Ezell from the South, very little in common, but they will write joint op-eds on their mutual love for the Jones Act. You know, it creates a lot of jobs, and it's just a very common sense national security law as well. I've got a paper with a stack of quotes, you know, 3 inches thick from military leaders talking about why the Jones Act is important. So I think where you see this opposition to the Jones Act is really from kind of you know, free trade purists who just want the cheapest option for everything, and that's all that matters. You know, international seafarers make about $650 a month. We're not going to treat our people that way. Shipbuilding, other nations have subsidies, as you mentioned, which makes them look more attractive. But if you always go with the cheapest option, you know, what's going to save me 50 cents today is going to end up costing you $100 later, because you lose that assured access to shipping, you lose those mariners, and you lose that security. So if we didn't have the Jones Act, you'd be paying for more Coast Guard, more CBP agents, more inspections of vessels. So it comes out later when you try and recreate either the shipbuilding industry or the maritime industry when you need it. So I feel like that perspective is people that are trying to save a buck now, theoretically, but then it costs you more later on.
You know, that's a stunning figure, $650 a month. That sounds like my paycheck when I was an ensign in 1981 in the United States Navy.
And that's per month.
Yeah, per month. I mean, can you imagine trying to live on that? You know, and these folks are going to sea for years and years and years just to save enough so they can eventually either support the family that's in another location around the world or hope someday for retirement. And if we paid our sailors and mariners like that, we wouldn't have a Navy, we wouldn't have a Merchant Marine, we wouldn't have a Coast Guard. So, wow, stunning statistic. Jennifer, anything to add on, why do people oppose this?
The other thing I think is just worth putting right out there is sometimes it's about following the money. Sometimes it is, the folks who are calling for repeal or reform of the Jones Act are literally being funded by entities who see an interest for their business or for businesses from their country. So not a lot of charitable work going on here.
Only in America could you do that, too, because we have freedom of speech, right? So you're welcome to have an opinion. If somebody's going to pay for that opinion, well, there's no restrictions on that.
That's right.
Exactly. And most of the criticism tends to come to the shipbuilding portion, right? People say that U.S. build requirement is what we criticize, but it's obviously the most important part of the three, because the most important part for our national security component for that shipbuilding industrial base. And there's a very interesting case study if you look at Philly Shipyard, right, which was dying. Then, they got a government contract for the national security multi-mission vessel, which helped them up a bit. But then what really pushed them over the edge was a Matson contract, $1 billion contract to build 3 Jones Act compliant container vessels. And that was so successful that it attracted the attention of Hanwha and that foreign investment that the government's looking after. So that Jones Act build requirement has really been a driver for investment in our shipyards in a way that you don't see elsewhere.
I'm really glad you brought that up, Sarah, because we're in the middle of, and this, being affiliated with the Navy League. Jennifer, you might not, but we're coming to the end of a study called the Allied Maritime Industrial Base. Last week, I was up at the Seaspan shipyards in Victoria and Vancouver, Canada. Those are U.S.-owned yards, owned by a gentleman in Missoula, Montana. And they're now building icebreakers and doing repair on ships. And in the past, there's been U.S. ships up there. But shipbuilding is so important to keep that constant. And we're also looking at the United Kingdom. I'm heading out there to 2 of their yards next week. We're looking at Italy. We've done the case study for Sweden. We've done the case study for South Korea. And really, really interesting stuff. This is kind of a glass half full study that looks for industry best practices across the board. I've been to the Philly shipyard twice under the former American ownership, and now just a month before Christmas under Hanwha's ownership. Those national security multi-mission vessels are fantastic. I mean, they're coming in more or less on time, more or less on budget. We got 5 ships, 3 are done. They're versatile and they're interchangeable. So I've suggested, let's take a look at them for submarine tenders, destroyer tenders, hospital ships, any kind of a carrier, a troop carrier, a command ship like USS Mount Whitney. Everybody knows on this broadcast, I love the USS Mount Whitney. She celebrated her 55th birthday this past month. And eventually that ship has got to be replaced. I think the National Security Multi-Mission Vessel will be terrific for that. So glad you brought that up. And one other thing, if you want to read about a fervent advocate for the Jones Act, our book, which I will shamelessly promote here, Returning from Ebb Tide, and Sara and the Transportation Institute helped us with that. First couple chapters are by John McGowan, who's one of our distinguished fellows, and he gets into the nitty-gritty on the Jones Act and will tell you like it is and tell you why it's good and tell you why the proponents of any changes to the Jones Act, that's the wrong answer. Okay, next up, Jennifer, why are inland rivers and coastal routes a national security asset, and what vulnerabilities emerge if those waterways are no longer controlled by U.S. operators and U.S. crews? I mean, shouldn't we be trusting of allies and partners, and even those that we don't like, if they're just coming here to deliver goods? And after all, they're going to spend money in our ports, so what's wrong with that?
Okay, so my answer to your question in there was no. House Majority Leader Steve Scalise has a great phrase. He talks about our inland waterways as the bloodstream of the nation.
Yeah.
And I love that. We do not want to be reliant on foreign-owned, foreign-built, foreign-crewed vessels to move cargo between U.S. ports through the bloodstream of our nation. Why not? Well, I mean, let's start with just kind of the benign scenario where foreign entity doesn't see it as in their best business interest to do it. Capital is going to go where there is a return on capital.
That's right.
We do not want to be dependent on a foreign carrier saying, yeah, you know what, I think, moving this cargo between St. Louis and New Orleans is in my business interest more so than moving it somewhere else in the world. We certainly do not want to be in a situation where control of our domestic commerce could literally be weaponized against us, and a foreign power that comes under, or a foreign vessel that comes under hostile control says we are picking up these vessels, which, by the way, are mobile assets, and we're shipping them out of here. We don't want to be in a situation where vessels transiting the bloodstream of our country become platforms for sabotage. Right now, yes,
exactly.
We have foreign vessels that come into U.S. ports, and there is a whole, infrastructure of Customs and Border Protection, of U.S. Coast Guard, which is designed to ensure that both the vessels and the people are fully vetted before they go any further. When we're talking about 25,000 miles of coastline, 12,000 miles of inland waterways, we do not have an army of CBP officers, stationed up and down the Mississippi River and its tributaries. And we don't need that because we have vessels that are owned, built, crewed by Americans. But that's the scenario that we've got. And I used the aviation example before. Sometimes I think maritime is just, one step removed in some folks' mind from something like aviation that they, might personally experience more. Imagine if you wanted to fly from DC to Chicago, and you had to depend on Air China or Air Egypt or, Royal Morocco Air. Pick a country. It does not have to be a hostile power. You had to rely on another country deciding it was worth it to them from a business standpoint to operate a flight between two U.S. points. You would not want to be there. We certainly don't want to be there when we're talking about the transportation of economically critical commodities, petrochemicals.
Yeah, I'm with you 100%. Oftentimes I'll go on road trips doing some mentor activities down in Norfolk, and the TV stations you get in the BOQ are sometimes less than desirable. So there's maybe one or two stations I can get on the antenna, on the rabbit ears. And one of them always pops up is this documentary about life in Alaska, the frozen north or something.
Yeah.
If those people had to depend on foreign delivery of goods and services, boy, it would be a really rough winter season,
Yeah.
And you've seen not only is it icy up there, but miserable conditions, sub-zero, and the ships have got to get in for supplies. There's only so much you can airlift. The rest of it has to come by sea. So thank God for the Jones Act in that regard.
Absolutely. And if I could just piggyback on that for just a second, we got a glimpse during the pandemic, of what supply chain disruption looks like. And what was really interesting was the side-by-side comparison we were able to do. So at the same time as you saw, these giant queues of foreign vessels lined up outside the port of LA Long Beach,
I remember that.
You did not have that in the domestic maritime market because you had, vessel owners who this was their home turf, this was their home market. There was no, our vessels were positioned, our containers were positioned over someplace halfway around the globe. It's like, nope, this is what we do, steady as she goes. And so we saw no diminution in service, and we did not see the wild swings in price.
Fantastic. And thanks for the phrase, the bloodstream of the nation. I absolutely love that. We'll credit the congressman with that. And one last thing, in and out of the Pentagon, I think I spent 12 years underwater, 12 years in the Pentagon, 12 years overseas. I did a lot of work with our N4, the logistics and sustainment branch, my friend Admiral Phil Cullum, and he was always getting involved in something called CFIUS cases, which is the Committee on Infrastructure in the United States. So we want to encourage foreign investment in the United States, but CFIUS helps vet some of that foreign investment to ensure that it's not a shadow company for the People's Republic of China that wants to come in and build a wind farm next to a fleet concentration area or a base like San Diego, right?
Yep. Right.
And those licenses they're denied. And so I see this as a very similar thing to protect our inland and coastal waterways. Joe, like you said, there's 105 other different things that do the same thing, so shouldn't be a surprise to anybody. You are listening to Maritime Nation, the Center for Maritime Strategy's podcast designed to dive deeply into the policy challenges facing America's sea services and the role of the United States as a sea power on the global stage. We aim to provide you with the highest quality analysis on the most pressing maritime security challenges by joining in conversation with key experts and practitioners. This season is produced with support from Jonathan Group Defense. Jonathan Group is an industry leader in rugged mechanical packaging solutions for critical electronic systems on land, at sea, and in the air. Jonathan Group designs and manufactures rugged and shielded rack mounting architecture, shock and vibration analysis and assemblies, as well as integrated systems, backplanes, and chassis for embedded applications. More than 65 design and manufacturing engineers operate over 650,000 square feet of manufacturing floor space across North America to deliver solutions deployed in unforgiving environments. They are recognized and distinguished by a proven track record that has garnered the trust of top leading defense, aerospace, industrial, and server data storage corporations. Jonathan Group's ultra-precise engineering and high-fidelity manufacturing support our surface ships, aircraft, and submarines. They keep our sensitive electronic equipment high, dry, and shockproof. If it's still working, it's Jonathan. Moving on. Sara, let's pivot to the Hill. So when think tankers and lawmakers propose modernizing or reforming the Jones Act, what types of proposals actually strengthen our national security and which ones risk quietly hollowing it out? What do you think?
So I do think anything that impacts the Jones Act or any changes to the Jones Act is very dangerous. You know, it's really steady. American companies, American workers have made investments into its future. And so you don't want to weaken that foundation, especially as we're looking to grow our shipbuilding capacity. So I think some things that we can do as we look to strengthen American maritime include, building that pool of workforce, right? Making more mariners. And that's somewhere where we've had a lot of success in working with Military Sealift Command, labor, industry, Congress, the Coast Guard. We've all pulled together to really tackle this challenge and make sure there's a bigger pool of workers for all of us. And also helping with shipbuilding. You mentioned the crazy subsidies that other nations have while we're shipbuilding. Significant. While we're shipbuilding with one hand behind our back. Yeah. And so if we really wanted to strengthen maritime dominance, I think we could do a lot more in terms of more favorable loan terms, a bigger pool of grants for small shipbuilding loans, greater investments there, and finding more ways to do that. I also think if we had better planning and coordination in some of these shipyards and ship repair facilities, that's something too. Just finding greater efficiencies within the system that we already have. So I would not make any changes to the Jones Act whatsoever. It's a foundation. It works. Things are moving. Prices are fair. Workers are paid fairly. So there's no real change to the Jones Act that I think would be appropriate beyond just let's see where we can help with these other areas that build upon that good foundation.
Yeah.
I like to use the analogy, a lot of the conversation that we've been having over the last couple of years, and I want to credit the Trump administration, I want to credit bipartisan members of Congress, about restoring America's maritime dominance, Ships for America Act, are really focused on growing the U.S. flag fleet trading in international commerce. And I think that's a very important area to train our focus on. The domestic fleet, with the foundation of the Jones Act, is really right-sized for our domestic market. The goal is not to have as many vessels as we could possibly build in that trade. The goal is to have the vessels that we need to move the cargo that needs to move within domestic commerce. When it comes to international markets, the more the better. And so I think that's where many of these proposals are rightly focused. It's interesting sometimes when somebody will say, yes, we need to restore America's maritime dominance, and maybe we should think about some tweaks tweaks to the Jones Act. That strikes me as, I want to put a couple of additional stories on my house, but first I'm going to let loose a crowd of termites in the basement, and we're going to weaken the foundation before we try to build on the structure. That doesn't make any sense. As Sara said, the Jones Act is the foundation, and we need to keep that foundation intact because it's vital to our economic security and our control of our own maritime borders. And then on top of that, in terms of growing the U.S. flag international fleet, plenty of work to be done there.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And, nobody in this country, particularly our political leadership that are trying to balance the books, likes the term subsidy. And really, President Reagan did away with that in the spirit of competition during the Reagan era. But we also like the SHIPS Act here. And it was announced here for the first time in 2023 at America's Future Fleet when Senator Kelly came over and tabled it. We didn't know that he was bringing it with him. He said he had a surprise announcement, and it was big news. I think Justin Katz got that one as the first reporter to get it out. Also authored by Congressman Walz, who's now at the UN, Senator Rubio, who's now at State, and Congressman Garamendi. We don't talk about subsidies. We talk about support. We talk about tax incentives, incentives for our port infrastructure, priority preference for U.S. flag ships that are coming in. If there's a foreign ship out there, well, the U.S. gets the berth before they do, and I think that's justified. I think the same thing happens in China or Chinese-controlled ports around the world where they're selective in who they let in and when they let them in. And then support for our merchant mariners and the Merchant Marine Academy, and they definitely need it. So SHIPS Act really brings all that in, and we're very, very supportive. Jennifer, can you walk us through some concrete examples about how Jones Act operators support military logistics, disaster response? Now, FEMA is going away. And so anybody doing disaster response becomes even more important nowadays, or Homeland Security missions. And they do this often without visibility. So let's give them some visibility.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for the opportunity to do that. So let's start with military logistics here at home. So I'm a runner, and sometimes as I'm out on my Sunday morning long run, I will see a Vane Brothers barge, moving a load of jet fuel to Joint Base Anacostia Bowling.
Oh, no
so
kidding.
yeah, so we've got American tug and barge operators, American maritime companies who are responsible for supplying U.S. military bases here at home. We've got some great photos of AWO member deck barges moving, big fleets of Jeeps and Humvees and various military vehicles down the Mississippi River. We've got some really cool photos of tugboats escorting aircraft carriers into and out of port. So the domestic maritime industry plays a really critical role as kind of a, homeland base for U.S. military operations. Disaster relief. As I mentioned earlier, this is our home market. This is our home turf. We're not going anywhere. These are our people. And so even when there is a disaster or a storm looming, U.S. domestic maritime companies are pre-planning, often in collaboration with governmental authorities. Okay, the Coast Guard has declared, port condition X-ray, and we're moving our way on up. So we're taking precautions now. We are ready. As soon as that port reopens, we are pre-positioned and we are ready to go. We saw this after Hurricane Maria, when there were lots of problems with landside infrastructure distribution of goods on the island. But what there was not a problem with was American vessels bringing supplies, whether that was telephone poles, whether that was water, whether that was containers full of other relief supplies to the island. So we are ready. We are embedded, in disaster preparations. And then Homeland Security generally. An example that I think is really interesting. Remember the Colonial Pipeline ransomware attack?
Who could forget
back,
that?
5 years ago or so?
Yeah.
Well, they really would have been out of gas in, kind of mid-South cities, Nashville, Memphis. But cities that were served by inland barge had a way of getting gasoline because there was that infrastructure. There was that resiliency. So it's just critically important, that we maintain U.S. control of this capacity, which is, so important.
We're so right. Americans are resilient. We'll always find workarounds. And I didn't realize that the barges that carried gas into the middle states in the country, especially those connected to some place like or some river like the Mississippi.
Yeah.
I've got a couple other
Yeah,
examples
please do.
too I'd like to
Yeah.
highlight. So I think this example for you would be really interesting as well. Is, you know, you think about the ports around Norfolk, around
Right.
San Diego, where we
Yeah.
have all these important Navy vessels. Who's going to dredge that? You want that dredging to be done by American companies that are
Great
known by
point.
the
Great
Coast
point.
Guard
Yeah.
that are able to do that. And then another, so that's kind of a national security piece that people don't really think about. You don't want to be letting in bad actors to observe our most valuable assets right underneath our noses. And then secondly, I'd like to flag for your audience, there's a great documentary on YouTube narrated by Tom Hanks called Boat Lift that highlights
really?
after 9/11, when Manhattan was struck, and you had a lot of commuters that were stuck on the island of Manhattan that couldn't get off, bridges were closed, subway was closed, and no one knew what to do. The Coast Guard put out a call, and all these Jones Act vessels, individual fishermen, individual, you know, tugboats, towboats, operators, just came sailing in. It is remarkable. It was actually a larger boat lift than Dunkirk in terms of the number of people removed. You had party boats, you had all sorts of Jones Act vessels that were helping get people off the island. And so it just kind of shows if you have that asset, you have American mariners, they will answer the call and they will be there for you.
The American Dunkirk. Boy, that's great.
Yeah.
I didn't know about that.
Yeah, narrated by Tom Hanks. It's really a very, you can't,
Even
have
better.
your, have your
better.
Kleenex ready. It's
Yeah.
very moving and
Even
really
better.
inspiring.
I tell you, I love that guy.
Yeah.
Greyhound, great movie. So dredging, you know, you wrote a note down about dredging. Important for surface vessels, really important for guys like me in a submarine.
Exactly.
So when we built the infrastructure was somewhat there. I think I was one of the first guys down in Kings Bay, Georgia. I was on a ballistic missile submarine, and you drove miles and miles and miles to get down to the pier, and the only thing you saw on this gravel road, which is now it's a thriving metropolis down there in Kings Bay. It's where we keep our Trident ballistic missile submarines and the facilities that serve the big weapons that go on that submarine, and then all the sailors and the training facility, Trident training facility. Now it's just beautiful down there, but you drive down this road and, you know, 5 miles in, the only thing you see was a dead armadillo on the side of the road. But dredging to get the Trident submarine, which is a deep draft vessel, we created an island next door. I forget what it's called, Crab Island or something like that, but it's like a navigation marker right now with all that dredge. Yeah. And I would not want a foreign nation to come in and do that, especially with an asset that was so important to our national deterrent as a ballistic missile submarine. And guess what? The Columbia class submarine, you know, which the Navy League proudly supports here in Washington, with the first of the class being named after the District of Columbia. That's an even bigger ship. So dredging is going to be even more important. So thanks for bringing that up. That was great. Next couple of rounds are really for both of you kind of a free-for-all. But I want to ask the question, and then I want to provide a qualifying statement. I'll kick it over to you. How should the Department of Defense and national security community better integrate the domestic maritime industry into defense planning without over-militarizing commercial operators? Now, let me tell you from experience something that happened to me. We were talking about it earlier today. While on active duty, and I was the 4-star at Joint Forces Command, Naples, Italy, Allied Joint Forces Command, so all the NATO, basically in Northern Europe and Africa, all the way from North Pole to the Cape of Good Hope, from halfway across the Atlantic to the shores of Israel. And we did an exercise up north in the high north called Trident Juncture. There were 50,000 soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, 70 ships, including Harry S. Truman Strike Group and Iwo Jima Strike Group. 8,500 U.S. Marines embarked on those ships. And then we had the Allies, and we had 10,000 tanks or rolling vehicles, 270 aircraft of all type model series. All that stuff rolled into Norway under a timer. So we pulled the starting pistol, and it all arrived within 30 days from sealift and everything else. So I'm not talking about sealift here. I'm talking about what did the Norwegians do to support that? Because there were stevedores on the pier 24/7. There were people, hotel business went up. Actually, our Marines stopped in Iceland on the way to Norway, and believe it or not, in Reykjavik, they drained every keg in town. They were very well behaved.
I do believe it.
Yeah, very well behaved. And that was the headline the next day. I get a call from SAC-Europe. What, this is the best you can do? Sir, they were very well behaved. They just didn't have enough beer. And so they got to Norway, and the Norwegians triggered something they call the total defense concept. During the heyday of the Cold War, people would actually put on their uniforms that they wore when they were conscripts to go out and support the cause. Everybody in Norway is part of the defense of Norway. So we had air traffic controllers, we had taxi drivers, hoteliers, all supporting us, and they were all wonderful. If you want to go to war with the Norwegians. They're great. Even the king, King Harald, who was 80 years old, and the crown prince, and Prime Minister Erna Solberg came out. She rode a Leopard tank with me. So from the top down or the bottom up, it's supportive. Now, is that over-militarizing your population? In the case of Norway, they don't have much choice because right around the corner is the angry bear. So what can we do to better integrate civil military in a cooperative way with regards to the Jones Act or with regards to shipping, whether that be merchant marine or maritime shipping, commercial shipping, to make our national security that much more robust?
I'll say we have a very good relationship now. The Department of Defense is very aware of the importance of commercial maritime. And so those are...
Why do you say that?
Transportation Command meets frequently with commercial leaderships from different industries because they're relying on trucks, on commercial railways, on commercial vessels. So they have regular meetings through the National Defense Transportation Association, have regular meetings just to kind of keep track and have those conversational lines open. And so,
are you in those meetings?
Yeah. So I'm some of them, and they have a big convention every year in St. Louis. So but they have regular ongoing conversations at the CEO level, union president level to make sure they're ready. So Department of Defense pays very close attention to the commercial industry to make sure, do you see any problems coming? So that way nobody is caught by surprise.
Okay.
So that is very important. And also a number of U.S. flag vessels participate in something called the Voluntary Intermodal Sealift Agreement, which is...
That's a mouthful.
It is a mouthful. We call it VISA.
Visa.
It's a lot easier.
Great. I love it.
And so these are commercial vessels that are not, maritime security programs, that are not in any formal relationship with the DoD, but they've signed up, at no, with no money, no payment, just saying, we want to be included. We will volunteer our ships. This ship, and, MARAD goes through and makes sure there's some utility, kind of checks the owners and makes sure that they're a trusted American. And then they are enrolled in this program that's almost like our fifth line of sealift defense. So that's a program that is out there and that has everything from small to international going vessels that participates. So I think that is really important, and a lot of credit to DoD and the leadership at Transportation Command for paying attention. But again, I think you could have better planning in the shipyard repair, where there's obviously going to be only so much capacity. And so scheduling that in a way to maximize efficiency, I think it would be good. Working together to increase that pool of mariners, so that way commercial industry and military sealift command aren't fighting over the same small pool of mariners, but rather have a large pool of trained workers that they can use. But like I said, they've been a wonderful partner. If you talk to any mariner, they are so proud of their history of supporting the Department of Defense, and they want to be there when the balloon goes up the next time. That is a big point of pride for them. And so they want to be ready. They want to help. And so I think it's just keeping those conversations, those communication lines open.
Fantastic. Jennifer.
So I was invited to participate, a year and a half ago or so, in a senior leadership conference over at the Coast Guard. And one of the questions I was...
At the headquarters?
At Coast Guard headquarters, yep. And one of the questions I was asked was, what changes in the event of a kinetic situation in terms of government, Coast Guard specifically, industry cooperation? And I said, our goal should be as little as possible. Obviously, some things are going to change. But what do we need to do now so that we're working together as well as we possibly can? And I focused on three things. One, trusted partners. Trusted partners are critical. The Jones Act, as we talked about, really ensures that the U.S. military can rely on trusted partners in the domestic maritime industry. Improved, strengthened communication. Sara talked about some of the forums that exist for that. I would note that, we've got the opportunity in the course of regular business, to deal together with challenges like high water and low water and ice and hurricanes. And all of these are opportunities to improve communication, cohesion, resilience, to do hot washes, after action reports, to look at what do we need to do better. Leveraging resources. If we really are in a conflict situation, we are going to have to do things in the most efficient way. So where are there things now that we can look at? The U.S. Coast Guard, instead of doing X itself, could rely on Coast Guard overseen third parties to do this, because in the event of a conflict, we're not going to be able to sweat the small stuff. Let's, make sure that we have systems that really play to everybody's strengths now, and that in a conflict situation, we're not abandoning our normal MO. We're saying we have MOs that are resilient enough that, they can do the things only they can do. We were talking a little bit with you just offline before the podcast started about a really, eye-opening, scary Chinese exercise that Sara and I both saw press reports about last weekend, where
New York Times.
Thousands of Chinese fishing vessels were engaged in kind of a sort of static blockade type practice. I'm not suggesting we need to do that, but we do know from our experience, in the maritime industry, drills and exercises are important. Drills and exercises are important to making sure that we know what to do when we need to do it. So I think it's very worthwhile to consider, through these forums for dialogue that we already have, and thank goodness we do, are there areas where we need to be testing, trying, making sure that we're confident that we have systems that work the way we would want them to in the event that we needed them to.
Yeah, that New York Times piece that you described to me is just absolutely scary. And China has force multipliers in terms of China Coast Guard. They combined 5 different agencies about 10 years ago into one, and that's the white shipping you see harassing the Philippines and Second Thomas Shoal. But then they have a massive fleet that is another force multiplier, the distant water fishing fleet, which is what you're describing. And almost like one of these drone light displays, and there they are driving a line which could impede or interdict fleet operations or restrict access to a coast, whether that be an ally or partner, or, God forbid, eventually the United States or one of our overseas territories. So thanks for bringing that up. Next question. What are the national security implications if domestic maritime trade were increasingly conducted by foreign-flagged, foreign-controlled vessels, even if they operate efficiently in peacetime? What do you think, Sarah?
So that really is kind of the nightmare scenario. As you mentioned, China is seeking to become the sole source of maritime power in the world. They would like everyone to be dependent on Chinese vessels for their shipping. And Chinese shippers are not privately owned. It is a state-owned enterprise that is subsidized by the government that has other goals besides profit. So it's very easy to imagine a scenario where we get rid of the Jones Act or open it up to foreign competition, and people are going to choose the cheapest option, which is going to be a state subsidized PLA vessel crewed by who knows who, sailing up and down our heartland, America, our what was the phrase you used?
Bloodstream.
The bloodstream of America. The
Yeah.
bloodstream of America, doing who knows what, right? Along these waterways are a number of soft targets, refineries, sports stadiums, residential homes that could all potentially be targets. And then there's also kind of that economic strangulation that Jennifer talked about earlier, where these non-contiguous states, Hawaii, Alaska, Puerto Rico, end up cut off from medical supplies or fresh food or milk or whatever it could be, because they're dependent on foreign flag shipping. And, even if it's not directly a Chinese-owned vessel, the Chinese maybe owns the loan that vessel is procured under.
Sure.
Or they have, or there's terrorists on these vessels. There's just too many bad case scenarios. And you may remember a few years ago, there was that Chinese weather balloon that scared everybody. Yeah, that was terrifying.
We ended up shooting it down with a missile and an F-16. Holy cow.
Yeah. So can you imagine that? Thousands of those on our waterways? It would be terrifying.
Absolutely. And one of the things that comes to mind is in the last year, since Christmas of last year, Even before that, we've seen attacks on critical undersea infrastructure of our allies and partners.
Yep.
Significant attacks in the Baltic Sea. NATO responded to the Russian shadow fleet. These are Russian flagged or conspicuously marked vessels, sometimes with the wrong name or another nation's flag, that drag simple anchors over cables or pipelines and do millions of dollars worth of damage, and then say, "Oh, I'm sorry, we just let our anchor go." So can you imagine having something like that happen in our inland waterways? Because there's a lot of stuff on the bottom of those waterways. I always say that, Mahan talked about sea lines of communication. The one he never envisioned was the one on the bottom of the ocean that carries infrastructure, oil, gas, and
Financial data.
bits and bytes of millions of dollars of transactions. And that would cripple us. Everybody thinks, I'm on my phone, I'm talking to a satellite. Well, going overseas, it's underwater.
Right.
Yeah.
Or
So-
even think about, the Dali, that was the Francis Scott Key
Jeez.
Bridge. That was a terrible tragedy and an
Terrible.
accident. But
Poorly
can't-
maintained.
but also you can't assume that that could be an inspiration for other attacks on our heartland. Right
Yeah.
now that people got the idea of using planes as a weapon, and now
Right,
they could
right.
see the potential for using a vessel as a weapon as
Yeah.
well. And we don't want that happening, or have that potential for happening over every kind of water access point that the United States has.
Exactly. You can only harden some of these bridges so much, and then you've got to take more draconian measures to restrict access to foreign flagged like that one. And that ship had some terrible maintenance issues. So probably shouldn't have been underway anywhere, let alone in the United States in Baltimore Harbor. Jennifer, anything to add on that?
So occasionally someone will say to me, what would America be like without the Jones Act? And my answer is borderless. And, you don't have to assess the probability of some of these scenarios that we were just talking
Yeah.
about to say being borderless is bad. Nobody wants that.
Sure. Yeah.
And I mentioned that study on cabotage laws around the world
Yeah.
that was just done for the second time in 2025 and previously had been done in 2018 by Seafarers' Rights International. And one of the things they found was that cabotage around the world is growing because countries are looking at the current era of geopolitical instability, and they're saying not only is it economically important, but it is important to our national and homeland security that we be able to control the movement of commerce within our borders. And we are seeing that in every continent. So it is just a rational response to the world we live in to want to make sure that we have the ability to secure our own borders.
And you bring up a good point. I was going to talk about this earlier, but I'll talk about it now. So the term cabotage, it's in Sara's TI report on the Jones Act, a French word, caboter, that means coastline, driving along the coastline. Just don't come in. So what does cabotage mean in terms of the Jones Act or in terms of our national security?
Yeah, so, cabotage by the capes, around the coast.
Yeah.
We want to make sure that we know who is around the coast, and we want to make sure if they're moving commerce between, two domestic points, it's us.
Yeah.
So that's just essential.
Absolutely. And the new national security strategy is homeland first, right? No surprise there. But I think the president and his cabinet have put significant emphasis on securing our borders, which is why we have a significant flotilla of Navy ships down in the Caribbean who are preventing the drug runners from coming up here and delivering, goods, bad goods to the United States. All right, ladies, last question. Take us home. Looking 10 to 20 years ahead, what decisions made today about the Jones Act and domestic waterways will most affect America's ability to project power, respond to crises, and defend the homeland? What a way to end. Sara.
I would say I think that the best thing we could do is have our national leaders, our Congress, be strong and ardent defenders of the Jones Act, and not just defend it, but embrace and celebrate it. It's brought us so many benefits, this national security, homeland security, economic security, that by protecting that foundation, that base, we can really only grow and strengthen our maritime power and maritime dominance.
Well said. Jennifer, last comment.
Here. That was fantastic. And then let's view policy decisions through the lens of, does this help or hurt our ability to continue to control domestic commerce within the United States? And I think if we keep the Jones Act strongly in place, and then we ask ourselves, is this helping or hurting our domestic fleet, we will be able to go beyond this maritime moment that many commentators have noted that we are in right now, and really embark on a new maritime era, which is so important to U.S. security.
Amen. And folks, that's a wrap. Thank you to Ms. Sara Fuentes and Ms. Jennifer Carpenter for joining us in the first edition of Maritime Nation in 2026. I'd like to thank our listeners for joining us each month. If you have not heard our previous episodes, you can always catch up on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or Google. And all content described here today can be found in our new website, www.centerformaritimestrategy.org. And thank you to Jonathan Engineered Solutions for the sponsorship and support, and James Peterson, our sound engineer. Stay tuned for the next episode of Maritime Nation, featuring Director Steve Carmel from the Maritime Administration next month. Yeah,
Excellent.
One of his first public appearances. And Steve, we know well from his time in previous jobs with Maersk, and he's been a great friend of the center. And this will be a nice complement to this discussion today.
Wonderful.
So,
he knows more than we do, so it'll be great to have him here and have him.
You guys know a lot, certainly a lot more than I do. Thanks very much.
Thank
Good
you.
to see you. Thank you.